Of course, one of the biggest challenges is how do you take a traditional business operating under the old paradigm of profit maximization, shareholder primacy, and traditional command and control leadership. How do you transform them into a conscious business? Now, this is not by any means an easy type of change. One of the metaphors that we use is that of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's the process of metamorphosis. It's the same creature, but actually in the process of changing from a caterpillar to a butterfly, it actually goes through a DNA transformation. It's the only creature we know that changes its own DNA during its lifetime to become something else, a higher life form, if you will, if you want to think about the butterfly as a higher life form. That's sort of the transition that companies need to go through. They need to have, in some sense, a DNA transplant. They need to re-examine their very reason for existing. Why do we exist? Why do we deserve to exist? Does the world need us? Would anybody miss us? Right? So you start with the idea of this higher purpose. And it doesn't come out of left field. You go back, look at your heritage, look at why you got started, look at what makes you successful, where you succeed, where you don't, look at what creates passion and engagement in your customers and your employees, etc. And you find the seeds of that somewhere in there, that there is this higher purpose. So there's a company in India that we're working with which was selling cooking oil and was doing okay and actually is floundering a little bit, competing with Unilever and Procter & Gamble and others as the market opened up. And some years ago, they decided that their higher purpose was going to be to reduce the incidence of heart disease in India, which has one of the highest rates of heart disease. And they said, oil contributes to that. So we're actually going to be all about reducing the incidence of heart disease. So we're going to educate people about heart disease. We're going to have all these free clinics and camps about cholesterol screening. We have a dial and nutritionist program. We have all these exercise things and so forth. Everybody got engaged and enthusiastic around that. And by the way, we'll have the healthiest possible oil. And we're going to encourage people to shift their consumption towards that and reduce their consumption of oil and all of those kinds of things. And that has completely turned the business around. That has increased sales of that brand by 400% over 5 years. It has made, 80% of the customers say they will never switch away from that brand. But again, the reason for doing all of this was not for that, to achieve that end. It was really to say, here's something worthwhile that we as a business can commit to and make a dent in. This idea of this tremendously high rate of heart disease, right? So it starts with that higher purpose, and that then creates engagement, enthusiasm, motivation, excitement, right? It's sort of a magnet that then aligns everybody in the same direction. So now you're all on the same side of the table as opposed to competing interests. If everybody believes in that, the customers believe, employees believe in that, suppliers, etc. So starts with that higher purpose. Second then is the idea of the stakeholder orientation. And this is where I think a systems view becomes very important. We have to understand the system as a whole, and the behavior of a system is a function of its purpose, and it's a function of the interconnections and the feedbacks between the different elements, in this case the stakeholders. How do we explicitly link these stakeholders together? How do we in fact make what's good for employees good for investors, and what's employees and customers? How do we align all of the interests together? And there's some specific mechanisms that you can do in order to in fact encourage the right kinds of behavior. And once you do that, it becomes a self-governing mechanism. You don't need to sit at headquarters and tell everybody what to do. You set up the system in such a way, you align the feedbacks and the incentives in a certain fashion, so that now everybody is incentivized to do the right thing, and they're all pulling in the right direction, as opposed to sub-optimizing their little piece, which ultimately doesn't result in optimizing the whole system. So that's probably the biggest piece of this. Once you discover the purpose, is figuring out how to, in fact, create the stakeholder alignment, and also meet the needs of each stakeholder at multiple levels. Just like for employees, we talked about job, career, calling. Likewise, for customers, there are multiple levels. For investors, there are multiple levels, partners and society as well. So when you think about meeting all those needs at those different levels. And the last element, of course, is, and this is where the board of directors comes in, you have to hire CEOs who are conscious, servant-type leaders who are not just motivated by money. If somebody is coming because you've got the largest paycheck, well, they don't have a passion for what your business is. They have a passion for their bank account, right? It doesn't mean you don't pay people reasonably well, but you pay them reasonably well. You don't pay outrageous amounts. And the companies that we have, their CEOs make good amounts, but they're way below industry norms. And their frontline people make way above industry norms. And that seems to be a formula for succeeding. The ratio between the highest and lowest pay at Whole Foods, for example, is 19:1, whereas in the typical publicly traded company is 450:1. That's a big difference, right? Stock options, typical publicly traded companies, 70% go to the top 5 individuals. At Whole Foods, 93% go to non-executives. rank and file. So those are some of the mechanisms that are specifically used in order to accomplish these objectives. So again, it's a long process, and it starts with commitment, it starts at the board level, it starts with senior leadership and having the right leaderships, and then goes on to purpose, and then ultimately stakeholder alignment. So it's a long journey, but it's certainly one that is worth embarking on because it's very meaningful and ultimately creates wealth and well-being, more importantly, well-being for all that are touched by it.